What's up everyone, it's Colin from GIY Guy here, and today we're talking garden soil. It's a beautiful day out, but winter is officially here, and so we can't plant anything, can't grow anything, so we're going to play in the dirt today. Now today's focus is garden soil and how you can take your soil from good to great. Now there's probably a lot of videos you've seen on YouTube of YouTubers showing how you can improve your garden soil with like organic material and composting and all that sort of thing, which is all great. I do that myself. But in order to make great soil, we need to understand what the current state of our soil is. And so today I have what I've dubbed the 3 pots of garden soil. The first of these is tilth. So I don't know if you've ever heard of the word tilth. I had not before a week ago. So I just did some research and was like, okay, what really is, how do you describe garden soil? And tilth is basically how good is your garden at growing things. That's the basics of it. So it covers everything from seed germination to water infiltration and drainage, how well water penetrates your soil. It covers root aeration, which is how much airflow does your soil get. And it also covers root growth, which is just how nutritious is your soil for your plants. So that is tilth. That's this kind of overarching sphere that we have of how do you describe your garden. And now the second pot is the texture pot. And this is really what dictates the tilth of your soil. In the texture pot, there's 3 bases that really make up every soil. You have clay, silt, and sand. Now clay, everyone knows what clay is. If you've ever been to a craft store, you know that it's really dense. And what it is a bunch of really small particles that pack tightly together. And so tightly that it actually prevents airflow and water flow, and it really prevents nutrition from getting to your roots. And in some cases, if you have enough clay, you're not even going to get your plants to grow through it. I actually tried to grow carrots last year and had a lot of clay in my soil, and my carrots were so janky. They just looked like these little monsters that I pulled out of the ground. So then I actually did some research and looked into a carrot fork. Go check that out if you're growing carrots. But anyway, so clay is really bad if you have too much of it, but also it's kind of the glue that holds everything together, so it is still a critical element in your soil. So the second one is sand. I think I went out of order, but we're going to do sand next. You know what a beach looks like, but you don't want a beach in your garden. However, you do need some sand just to create that aeration in your soil. Sand allows water to flow a little more freely, allows nutrient transmission through your soil. If you don't have enough sand, then your soil is just going to pack tightly together because of the clay. So sand is really good in small quantities. Now the final one is silt. If you've ever looked at like a flower bed after a rainstorm or something, you might see all this deposit at the end of the flower bed. It's really dark, rich dirt. That is silt. Silt is the most fertile component of your soil, and silt is really like a sponge. It just soaks up water and holds nutrients, really good for water retention. But you don't want 100% silt because then it's going to drown your plants because it doesn't dry out very quickly. And if you have really wet soil, then your plants are going to get root rot, which we do not want. So those are the 3 bases, and those 3 bases make up what is the ideal soil, which is called loam. I'm sure if you've watched an educational gardening video, you know what loam is, but it's the perfect combination of sand, silt, and clay. Alright, I'm editing the video right now and just realized I forgot to talk about the third pot, which is structure. It's not very important at all because most gardens have the same structure, which is just granular. If you want to look into structure, you can go ahead, but it's really not relevant for our conversation unless you're going to be a geologist or something. So today in our garden, we want to find out how close we are to that ideal loamy soil. And I've got a diagram that I'll actually show toward the end, but first I'm going to run a little experiment. This is my Bill Nye the Science Guy moment, garden edition. And so right now I have no idea what's in my soil. I don't know what the makeup is. I know I've hit some clay in there before, but I really want to do a test that tells me what kind of makeup I have of sand, silt, and clay. How close am I to loam? And so what I have over here, I have 3 sections that I'm going to dig from, and just to get a good sample size in my garden. I don't want to just dig in one spot and then maybe hit clay and be like, oh wow, my garden's all clay. So I got 3 different sections that I want to dig in. And I also have 3 jars. So I'm going to call this the shake test. So in these 3 jars, I've filled them about 2/3 to 3/4 of water. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to take a small scoop of dirt from each of these sections in my garden, and I'm going to put it in these jars. And then we're going to shake it up and let it sit, and we'll come back, and hopefully, if you've ever seen that experiment where they put like oil, water, and corn syrup in a glass, then you can see all 3 layers. Hopefully that's what we're going to accomplish today. I haven't run a dry run of this before, so this is the first time. So that's what it should look like. I'm actually going to do a time lapse and show you kind of the process of it stacking up. And then from those jars, by inspecting these jars, we're going to take this chart that I found, and we're going to find the percentages, approximate percentages of sand, silt, and clay, and then we can kind of triangulate where we are on this spectrum. And there's this ideal portion, this ideal intersection that is loam, and we're going to see how close we are to that ideal intersection. So let's go ahead. I'm going to take my shovel. I'll just bring each scoop of dirt back to the cup, and I'm gonna go ahead and fill them up. I'll just fast forward through this real quick. Alright, so I've got my samples in my 3 jars. I actually took just a small scoop of dirt from each of these sections in my garden. I tried to disperse them a little bit so we can get a good sample. And if you've ever seen, like up in the Arctic, they do like these core samples where they drill out a chunk of ice and sample it. That's basically what we're doing here. I went about 4 or 5 inches down in my soil, because at most your roots are going to grow about 4 to 6 inches into the dirt, and then unless you have like ochre or something which grows a little bit deeper. But now that we have our samples, we're going to go ahead and put the lids on them, and we're going to shake them.
One eternity later.
Alright, so there's our mud samples at this point. Now I'm actually going to start the time lapse, and you can watch how the layers form. Fingers crossed we'll actually see some layers. I have no idea if this is actually going to work or not though. Alright everyone, it's been about an hour and a half, and we finally got our samples settled enough to where we can start to see these layers. So the bottom layer that has formed already, it's a little bit hard to distinguish the sand and silt layers just for color, but the particle size is definitely different. So this bottom inch is our sand layer. The next layer up is our silt, and then finally we're starting to see the forming of a clay layer. And the reason it's not very thick right now is because a lot of it is still floating around in the water. As I mentioned before, they're really fine particles, and so they take a while to settle. But if we came back tomorrow, I'd like to think that our water would start to be clearer, and we would actually see that clay layer double or triple in size. And then finally, at the top of our water, we have this organic material that's just floating around. Now that we have our samples, we can actually go ahead and analyze them. And this is the last part of the experiment. And so what I found this triangle diagram that shows 3 sides. We've got our clay, silt, and sand, and it shows percentages on each side of this triangle. And as you can see on the triangle, there's a loam section near the bottom middle, and that is what we're shooting for. So I've actually outlined in red the ideal ratios of sand, silt, and clay that bring us to the center of that loam soil. And so actually when you look at this, that ideal ratio is 20-40-40, clay, sand, and silt. And we're actually pretty close to that, especially if we see our clay layer double or triple. So I am very happy with how this experiment turned out, and I can't wait to grow with this soil in the springtime. Now, I hope you enjoyed this episode. This is a super easy experiment to try yourself. I highly recommend you do it, especially right now. You know, there is nothing better to do in the garden other than maybe put down a ground cover if you watch last episode. But right now, you can't plant or grow anything, so why not analyze the soil a little bit? So if you run this experiment, you'll have a better understanding of your garden soil, and then come springtime, you can be confident in your soil when you get out there and grow it yourself.